The first ring of the bell echoed through the halls of Emerson High. Evelyn Albright stood by the massive door of the chemistry room, taking a deep breath. Her formal suit and neat bun did not cause her any excitement, but inside she felt a whirlwind of emotions. Ahead of her was her first period, a new school, where the social rules were clear and harsh. The exhaust smoke from the major suburban roads seemed to flow toward the school, filling the atmosphere with melancholy. The room was spacious and bright. The shelves with flasks and reagents glowed under lamps, although the design remained typically institutional. Students slowly filled the rows of desks, some casting unfriendly glances to the side. Evelyn smoothly opened her notebook and began. Her voice was quiet but confident, as if each phrase had been thought out in advance. She introduced herself. "My name is Evelyn Albright. I will be your chemistry teacher." There was a pause in the class. No one rushed to answer except for the soft rustling of pages. Among the students, a trio already known for their control over the school was emerging. Caleb Vance, tall and imposing in his team t-shirt, sat with a cocky grin while his teammate Marco Rizzi shuffled his feet, showing impatience. Jenna Hayes, her hair perfectly coiffed and her smartphone in hand, scanned everything around her like a hunter preparing for the hunt. Their gazes never left those who seemed weaker. After class, the atmosphere grew tense. In the cramped, noisy hallway, students hurried to their shifts, getting in each other's way and creating a tangle of voices. Evelyn walked carefully, trying not to get caught up in the thick of the school's passions. Laughter and whispers were heard behind her. It was them. Caleb nodded to Marco, who walked up to the back row where the teacher stood and slowly reached out to tug at her skirt. Time slowed down, but Evelyn was one step ahead. Without turning around, she took an almost imperceptible step to the side and skillfully tripped Marco, using his momentum. The boy's body fell to the floor, causing the students to burst into laughter. Jenna, holding the phone, lowered it, as if suspecting that the moment had turned out to be a failure. Silence ran through the hall like a cold wind before the noise and giggles resumed. Evelyn turned slowly, her transparent gaze striking the three carefree faces. Not a word, just a slight adjustment of her glasses and a determined walk away. Veronica Steele, the librarian and a trusted person at the school, watched from her window in her hiding place. She noticed Evelyn standing up to the school without a word. Later, in a quiet room, Tide Carter, the biology teacher, approached her and said, "This woman is not what she seems. She has a plan." A small smile flickered across Veronica's lips. Indeed, behind the modesty, there was a cool mind, ready to do what others did not dare. In an empty classroom a couple of hours later, Ms. Albright sat down at her desk with a pad of paper and a pen. On the first page, she carefully wrote 3 names: Caleb, Marco, Jenna. She circled each one and thoughtfully drew a line between them. A spark of determination flashed in her eyes. This incident was just the beginning. Now was the time to show that there had been a powerful internal movement, not a fluke. Caleb and his gang thought they owned this school. Their power was based on fear and humiliation. But here's what was truly amazing. Miss Albright wasn't going to give up. She studied their every move, every word, putting together the puzzle pieces of their lives. Her plan was methodical and cold, and it would soon make this school a witness to how true strength is revealed through intelligence and patience. Meanwhile, Jenna couldn't believe what had happened. Her perfect reputation was unprotected. Her account was being monitored more closely than ever. The boys with athletic looks were starting to give her a wide berth, and the students were now looking at the trio with doubtful spots. It was the first sign that change was coming, that a new teacher had not just entered the school, but had entered a game that couldn't be lost. In the hallway, between the few seconds of silence and the resumption of laughter, there was a condensation of energy that could not be ignored. Ms. Albright turned to the class, her gaze commanding respect for boundaries with its icy calm. She walked out of the room and eyes froze behind her. Anticipation hung in the air, a harbinger of the coming reckoning. She walked the halls like a strategist, assessing the battlefield as she moved from room to room, knowing there was a lot of work ahead. Suddenly, Tide Carter's voice rang out softly. "What they did to you today is just the tip of the iceberg, Evelyn. But their every move is already recorded. This wasn't just a school. It was a complex system that she was going to destroy from the inside." As she closed her notebook, she stared at her reflection in the window. The uncertainty of the morning had dissolved, replaced by a calm determination. It became clear at that moment that this first day had been just a prelude to a more brutal game, one in which the stakes were much higher. And so, as the corridors filled with the noise of voices once more, and the trio of untouchables gathered once more in their usual company, there was a change in the air. The silence before the storm. There was much action ahead, each of which would prepare the ground for revenge, methodical and precise. All this, and much more, would be revealed very soon. Incident in the corridor. The crowded hallway of Emerson High was a jumble of sounds, ringing voices mingling with the rustling of bags and the creaking of shoes. Chemistry had just ended, and the students were quickly crawling back to their corners in their usual rush. Between the rows, near the side exit, a small group was forming, generating a nervous atmosphere. Caleb Vance, captain of the football team and the undisputed leader of the school's social hierarchy, watched the scene with a tense gaze. His strong body, like a magnet attracting the gaze of those around him, emphasized the unspoken threat. Today, he intended to play out another scene, to demonstrate power and submission in a single dance of cruelty. Somewhere nearby stood Marco Rizzi and Jenna Hayes, Caleb's faithful companions in the management of the school kingdom. Marco, as if ready for any order, kept his eyes fixed on the target, the modest and reserved Miss Evelyn Albright. The chemistry teacher, with her neatly pulled back hair and strictly buttoned blouse, seemed incapable of upsetting the balance of the established order. But today there was something different in the air. Jenna had her phone in hand, ready to capture any moment for her controversial blog, Emerson Unfiltered, where she effortlessly maintained her status as the most influential girl in school. "Marco, you remember what I want," Caleb said shortly, nodding his head toward Ms. Albright. His voice, with its hint of a royal decree, left no doubt. "Show everyone who is boss. Her skirt, so she will feel in her place." Marco rushed forward, moving deftly toward his victim like a predator toward his prey. His hand jerked back, ready to fly off and touch the fabric of the skirt to cause embarrassment and humiliation to the audience. But that was where he was wrong. Evelyn, without turning around, as if anticipating his move, took a slight step to the side, which turned into an elegant footrest. Under the influence of his own inertia, Marco lost his balance and fell with a dull thud onto the cold tiles. The excited crowd froze for a moment, and then mocking laughter rang out, mixed with weak calls to help the victim. Jenna, whose phone was already raised to record, suddenly lowered the device, raising her eyebrows in bewilderment. Evelyn slowly turned around, turning her gaze on the three of them, addressing them with a silence as sharp as a blade. Her eyes, hidden behind her glasses, seemed icy through the thick glass, mercilessly assessing each of them. No emotion, no hint of weakness, just a methodical challenge that did not require words. Adjusting her frames with restraint, she walked confidently towards the exit of the corridor, leaving a silence hanging in the air behind her, broken only by the light rustle of school bags. At this point, the frustrated and angry crowd gradually dispersed, leaving a feeling that the usual rules of the game had suddenly changed. "Marco, hope is fading," Jenna muttered dryly, putting her phone in her pocket. Caleb frowned, trying to comprehend the unexpectedness of the defeat. "This is not the end." His gaze grew colder, as if the calculations of the upcoming battle had moved into the labyrinths of his mind. The crowd's fading energy and Ms. Albright's calm began to echo in unison in the small chemistry classroom. Here, among the white walls and metal tables, Evelyn opened her black notebook, where notes from her lessons sat next to the discrete circles and arrows circling the names of Caleb, Marco, and Jenna. Each name was enclosed in an oval, like the squares on a chessboard, demanding a precise move. She drew herself into silent concentration, scanning the images of her students through the prism of her own logic. In the dim light of the lamps above the table, her fingers slowly guided the pen as simple lines turned into complex diagrams. The goal was not just immediate punishment. The masterfully constructed plan was to destroy the established world of privilege, to abolish the power that had just proven itself so clearly and deservedly. At this hour, the silence of class space became the forge of a new strategy in which cold calculation and psychological precision merged into one elusive, fatal blow. Outside in the library, Veronica Steele, Evelyn's assistant, leafed through her textbooks, but her ear caught the echo of what had happened. "The game is just beginning," she said quietly to herself, and peered out the window, where Ms. Albright's smile became an impenetrable mask for the trials to come. Meanwhile, in the next room, Tide Carter, Evelyn's biology teacher and friend, was preparing his notes, unaware that this school day was about to turn into the beginning of a new era where power and weakness would be reversed. Meanwhile, Jenna was trying to sort out her inner turmoil. Her usual control was slipping through her fingers. Her reputation, the seed that held her popularity together, was suddenly vulnerable and fragile. Every next step had to be calibrated to the millimeter, or else her fragile world of power could collapse. She glanced briefly at her phone, thinking about her own game, unaware that in the hands of the mystical Evelyn, she had already become a pawn in another plan. Caleb stood in the center of the school football field, struggling with the anger that was tearing him apart. His usual vanity had been burned by the unyielding opposition, and his status as king was beginning to crumble. As if on a dramatic stage where titans were clashing, he felt the weight of his past being gradually lost. In the chaos, he began to realize that the new teacher was not a helpless newcomer. She was unique, surpassing everyone else in her meticulousness, like a chess player arranging his pieces several moves ahead. Principal Graham Elroy glanced down the hallway, picking up signs of turmoil. His neutrality in this game was key to maintaining order, but he, too, sensed that the rules were changing. His office was flooded with calls and questions from concerned parents, and he knew this would not be a one-time incident. There was growing tension at Emerson High, but so was hope for improvement. As he thought about it, he couldn't help but think of Ms. Albright and her unusual fortitude. Later that day, Veronica quietly approached Ms. Albright, holding several books on psychology and adolescent behavior. "If they think you've given up, they're wrong," she said with gentle confidence, watching her teacher close her notebook of plans. Evelyn nodded, a new light of determination in her eyes. This wasn't just a game. It was chess, where every piece mattered, and the stakes were higher than either side would admit. Thus, the chariot of change began to spin, leaving a trail of questions in its wake, and smoothly moving on to the next stage, the moment when the sharp intellect would be exposed in full force, and the deception used openly would return like a boomerang. Each of the trio of untouchables already felt that the light of their crown was beginning to dim, and the theater of revenge, which began as a quiet whisper, was ready to explode in a public tragedy, completely changing the balance of power at Emerson High. Start of the game. The room was almost empty, just a couple of old desks and a black and green board with a chemical cycle sketched out in chalk. The dim light from the window barely filtered through the blinds, casting shadows. Evelyn Albright sat at her desk in the center of the burnt-out office. Her fingers silently fiddled with a sheet of paper on which an intricate plan was drawn in barely discernible lines and arrows. Her gaze was focused, cold, as if she were studying not school equations, but a blueprint for a future victory. There was no trace of panic or despair here, only calculation and precision. There was a soft knock at the door. Veronica Steele, a stern woman with thick-rimmed glasses, walked in quietly, without fuss. The librarian knew a lot about the school, even what was hidden between the lines of journals and comments in electronic databases. She carefully placed a thick bundle of papers on the table next to Evelyn. "Caleb, Marco, and Jenna," she murmured, feeling for the words. "All three have their weak points, and not just on the surface. Gossip, rumors, grades. All of these are fruits we can harvest." Evelyn nodded, not taking her eyes off the sketches. The hope of success was based on knowledge and patience. To destroy the trio meant digging deep, using their own weapons against them. Tide Carter, the biology teacher, peered into the room with a broad smile, but there was a hardness in his eyes. "Are you sure you want to play this game their way?" he asked, sitting down on the edge of the table. "They think they have control of the school, but they're trapped in their own little traps," Evelyn said quietly. "We'll just open the doors, and they'll be too crowded." Tide nodded approvingly and pulled out his clipboard. He was helping to root out the lies with intelligence and facts that had become a weapon in Miss Albright's hands. "I scanned their public pages. Jenna is not particularly careful with her posts," he noted. "First, we need to neutralize the media threat," Evelyn said. "Jenna Hayes spews venom on social media, but sometimes she gets caught in her own contradictions. We need to force her to falsify her seductive bastion wall." Veronica had already prepared archival photographs and clippings from old school newspapers. Maps to inconsistencies and hidden vulnerabilities. Everything was on display. "What about Marco?" the librarian asked. Physical strength is the facade, pride is the crack. We need to make him lose face. Evelyn nodded, remembering the thoughts of her allies. Deep in the chemistry lab, reagents were quietly sparkling, but the real action was taking place in the classroom. The plan was to penetrate the students' world through their weaknesses. Excitement was in the air as Evelyn drew up the first protocol for extracting information. A secret account, double requests, message interceptions, and responses to provocations, all polished to the point of mechanism. Every step was calibrated to minimize the risk of exposure. While the three untouchables waited for another triumph, Ms. Albright wove the threads of moves into the control grid. Further collaboration with Claire Montgomery, a local newspaper reporter, opened the door to a wider audience. Claire was a vital link, able to turn dry facts into devastating truth. Their meetings took place in an abandoned part of the school library, a hub of old shelves and mysterious shadows. To follow Caleb and his team was to understand the intricacies of their situation. Behind their every action lay an unwavering thirst for power and a fear of possible fall. Evelyn knew that it was this last factor that could be used to maximum advantage. At the same time, signals of violations were coming into Director Graham Elroy's office, but for now he remained on the sidelines, watching the unfolding spectacle with a cold distance. His role was not so much decisive as neutral testimony that could tip the scales in the right direction, provided that concrete evidence appeared. Evelyn understood this and organized her actions so as not to provoke premature intervention. "Everything important begins with a quiet rustle," she whispered to herself. The elaborate plan is divided into 3 stages, each with its own timeline and structure. The first is to destroy Jenna's reputation, the second is to challenge Marco's physical might, and the last, most subtle and dangerous, is to destroy Caleb's illusion of immunity. For each, the facts, the audience, and the tools are assembled. Every wrong move is unacceptable. Each move is like a move on a chessboard, trying to trap the king. As Evelyn pondered the details, she felt her inner certainty grow stronger with each new page of the diagrams. She imagined how, with each little drop of humiliation, unnoticed by outsiders, the foundation of the trio would be undermined, destroying the threads of connection and turning them into ordinary students without influence. "They will have to learn to live again," thought Miss Albright, "or leave this arena." The countermoves were planned so as to seem random or to fit the logic of school life, and no one would suspect the director. In the midst of all this, quiet conversations with Veronica were invigorating. Without unnecessary emotion or excessive warmth in her voice, the librarian pointed out weakly guarded places in the digital space and helped build a network of information traps. From understanding the behavior of teenagers to the intricacies of school rules, every detail came together to form a single picture. Tide, although more smiling and open, followed the biological aspects of character, helping to notice the reinforced stress and pressure that are beyond the eye. As the night drew near, the campus echoed once more with distant voices and footsteps. To the trio of untouchables, everything seemed normal, an ingrained state of affairs. But in the shadow of every glance, every gesture, Evelyn was already lurking, like a predator in ambush. This was a game to be won, and it was not just revenge that depended on it, but a paradigm shift in power at Emerson High. Evelyn glanced down at the list of targets, confidently adding the details that would lead to their inevitable demise. The work opened the door to new power and control, not the loud and reckless kind of control that Caleb and his team had, but the quiet and relentless kind. In this quiet classroom, where formulas mixed with strategy, it became clear that the defeat of the trio of untouchables was only a matter of time, nothing more. All that remained was to make the first move and let the system surrender to the inevitability of a quick reckoning. This was what her tacit consent to war meant. Outside, the corridors slowly emptied, the sounds died away. Night was falling, and with it, the hope of replacing the old order with new rules. Evelyn looked out the window where the lights of the surrounding streets glowed and said quietly, "Let the games begin." She was no longer the humble teacher who had been humiliated that morning. She was a strategist now, level-headed and decisive. The hour of reckoning was near. The old giants would fall, giving way to something fairer and more reasonable. Smoothly moving into the next stage, she closed the diary and turned off the light, preparing to concentrate on the implementation of her plan. Time was on her side, and the chance to destroy the impregnable fortress of power, with just a cold mind, was becoming a tangible reality. The next act promised to be a real battle of wits, where not swords but words and evidence would become weapons. And the story was just beginning to gain momentum. The collapse of Jenna's media empire. The school day at Emerson High began as usual with the hubbub and gossip in the hallways. But beneath the familiar noise was a new game, one where every move was precise and astonishing. Ms. Evelyn Albright slowly closed the door to her chemistry lab, opening her laptop to an alarming social media website. Her gaze immediately focused on Jenna Hayes' Emerson Unfiltered account. This was where the school's media brainpower was born, masquerading as harmless school fun. The girl in the frame looked impenetrable, confident and accustomed to the fact that her words lived on thanks to thousands of subscribers. But Evelyn knew that in order to break this throne, it was only necessary to strike at its base in the right way. Veronica Steele, the school librarian, quietly looked into the lab. Her face expressed interest and inspiration. She put an old folder with school newspaper archives and notes on the table. "Do you want to play on their pride and lies?" she asked, smiling coldly. Ms. Albright nodded. Hidden deep in the paper, she found Jenna's weak points. Through an online profile created for surveillance, this information could be turned into a weapon. It was decided to launch a chain of events, disguised as an accident as possible, so that the media brain would eat itself from the inside. Among Jenna's posts were a number of old photos where she positioned herself as the giver of the perfect life, giving no reason to doubt her sincerity. However, after comparing these photos with several other shots and comments, Evelyn found contradictions. In one post, Jenna claimed to have attended a popular event at school for the first time, while photos on another user's profile proved the opposite. In a limited circle, such errors are enough to sow doubt. Understanding the psychology of teenagers and their dependence on public opinion, Ms. Albright decided to play on Jenna's greed and self-confidence. Through a dummy account that she created with Veronica, an anonymous announcement appeared about a new, sensational gossip. A story about another popular student who hid a serious rule violation and now will receive severe punishment. This news was specially designed to interest Jenna and make her rush to publish such hot material. Jenna, obsessed with maintaining her media dominance, failed to verify the information, succumbing to the temptation to create explosive content. That evening, when the school was already sinking into silence, the post on Emerson Unfiltered exploded with an explosion of likes and comments. As usual, everyone was buzzing about the gossip, oblivious to the consequences it might have. Ms. Albright watched cautiously through the window of the neighboring classroom, like a conductor waiting for the climax. The next day, in the school lab, the teacher gave a carefully prepared lesson with a demonstration of a chemistry experiment that clearly demonstrated the impossibility of the alleged incident. The bottle of reagents, the color flowing from the tube, and the accompanying explanations debunked the lie exactly. The students began to whisper quietly and exchange glances, quickly putting together a chain of facts in their heads. The destroyed reputation of the media brain turned Jenna from a selfless leader into a figure of ridicule and suspicion. The crowd increasingly turned away from the famous page, and the number of followers noticeably decreased. Jenna stared at the screen of her smartphone as if in confusion, not understanding how everything went wrong. Trying to analyze the situation, she looked for allies, but the feeling of loneliness only grew. Veronica stayed by her side, smiling quietly. The first blow has been dealt. Jenna's power was fading along with her reputation, and it was not only she who was worried. Caleb Vance and Marco Rizzi watched from their territory, clearly feeling the growing tension. Marco in particular was irritated by Jenna's inability to maintain the trio's previous status, and this played into Ms. Albright's hands. While rumors circulated in the school cafeteria that Jenna had lost control of her empire, Evelyn and her close friend, biology teacher Tide Carter, discussed the next plan. Tide nodded tensely. They need to be attacked on 3 fronts if you want to destroy their fragile, shiny armor. Ms. Albright had already begun the next step, defeating the physical force that Marco represented. But for now, everything here belonged to Jenna, and the destruction effect of the media web itself had to be adjusted. Claire Montgomery, a local newspaper reporter and an ally of Ms. Albright, had confirmed that she had received some classified information about Jenna's activities that would cause quite a stir. She was delving into the details, preparing the material for a powerful expose. That evening in the library, Veronica watched with curiosity as Evelyn decided which of the old reports would be best processed for a new slander. "If this is used in the right direction," the librarian said, "their world will begin to crumble even faster, especially for Jenna." Evelyn exhaled slowly, her coldness still impenetrable. Every move was like a chess move, where the enemy never knew what to expect. Yet despite the apparent victory, Ms. Albright knew that gossip alone would no longer be able to completely break Jenna. This victory was only the entry point to a deeper battle for the balance of power at the school. The entire life of Emerson High was slowly but surely moving into a new phase, one subordinated not to physical strength, but to precision, calculation, and accuracy. In the classroom, along with the smoking flasks and the active conversations, the seed of change was already sprouting, and although the trio still tried to hold on to their power, the air became thick with anticipation of what was to come. The silent bell echoed through the hallways, inviting everyone to the next game, where the stakes were higher than ever. The transition to the next stage of revenge was already inevitable. The forces were laid out, the pieces were set. The chemistry of great change was just beginning to bubble. Marco's public defeat. Emerson High Chemistry Week began with the traditional ceremonial assembly in the old auditorium, where Evelyn Albright laid out the rules of the competition, emphasizing once again that this was not just a game, but a test of knowledge and character. Caleb Vance sat in the front row, smiling smugly, confident of his team's impending victory. His gaze occasionally crossed with the anxious face of Marco Rizzi, the physical force of the Untouchables trio. Marco, accustomed to unconditional respect on the football field, now had difficulty hiding his anxiety. Evelyn paused to let everyone feel the weight of her words, and the class was tensely silent. The first round of the competition began with simple questions, but behind them there was already a trap: physical chemistry, reactions that require not just memorization, but an understanding of the essence of the processes. Marco nervously rubbed his fingers at his desk when it was his turn to answer at the board. Unlike his usual rude style, where he dominated through force and insults, now knowledge was required, which he clearly ignored. The first question was an element consisting of several isotopes with different masses. Marco spoke dryly, his eyes darting around as if searching for clues, and was completely at a loss when Evelyn calmly reminded him that he was lucky that the questions were elementary. The class grew noticeably noisier. Caleb tried to support his friend, chuckling loudly, but it sounded tentative. Jenna Hayes stood at the back, recording everything on her phone out of habit. Her eyes were a mixture of amazement and growing anxiety. She knew that it was vital to the trio's status that Marco not fail and take the hit, but reality was throwing a wrench into their plans. The next question was about calculating molar mass, a minimal challenge for anyone who had ever looked at a textbook. Marco made several mistakes, cheerfully juggling numbers, but the answers were wrong, and the students' laughter began to turn into outright mockery. Evelyn watched as Marco's confidence eroded. She took her time, waiting for the moment when his broken pride would manifest into a public fall. After each inappropriate answer, she skillfully asked clarifying questions, making him even more confused. The atmosphere in the classroom grew heavy. Laughter turned to hidden tension, and the gossip emanating from different corners of the room only increased the effect. Marco, like a mirage of a huge warrior, was today only a pitiful shadow of himself, a guy who was afraid not of physical strength but of public humiliation. Caleb tried to intervene, directing Marco with his eyes, urging him to resist. But Evelyn had moved on to the next stage of the test, a team discussion of the chemistry experiment needed to solve the problem. She had forced the students to work in pairs, where Marco would have to face students he usually didn't take seriously. This in itself became a platform for humiliation, as the weaker ones would be held accountable if they made a mistake. Marco quickly realized that he had lost the respect he had previously thoughtlessly disregarded. His attempts to dominate with his voice and looks were a pressure attack that only exposed his vulnerability. Outside the classroom, the school librarian, Veronica Steele, watched all the shadows of what was happening, carefully checking her watch. She knew that Evelyn was not working on emotions, but as a true strategist. Tide Carter, a friend of Ms. Albright's and a biology teacher, looked into the hallway and then said quietly, "She's on the right track." His understanding of the situation was a gentle reminder that this was not a simple punishment. It was a lesson that bitterness would turn into a powerful control for future battles. Meanwhile, Jenna, her usual social media, went silent. Posts about Marco in trouble were spreading. Peripheral comments were taking over the masses. And even she couldn't control the scale of the wave. The trio's popularity was beginning to crumble. Jenna was barely able to stop herself from intervening, but Evelyn was playing it more accurately than anyone thought possible. All three elements, power, status, and reputation, were slowly disintegrating, and there was no sign of turning the tide. At the end of the lesson, Evelyn approached Marco, who was trying to hide his blush and the mixed feelings of humiliation and anger, with his face turned toward the window. She said slowly and clearly, without raising her voice, "Real power is not in bullying or being louder than others. It is in self-control and honesty with yourself and others." Marco did not answer, and the first rumors about how the captain of the football team looked today were already spreading along the corridor. Ms. Albright's words were heavy, but in the right place. It was sweet poison for ambition. Caleb, passing by the headmistress's office, heard all the conversations, although he restrained himself from interfering directly. He knew that his time and power was now at risk. But what scared him most was the thought of how his father would react to seeing Ms. Albright's work. He could already feel the icy gaze of disappointment and anger of the influential parent on his back. This whole game was no longer a simple school drama. It was acquiring depth and inevitability. The night had decided much. Evelyn calmly checked the results of her calculations and strategies. She was already mentally running through the next move, allowing herself a slight smile. Cold, but satisfied. The game had built in not only knowledge, but also psychological techniques that the false leaders of the seniors had dismantled. This was only the first serious battle, and Miss Albright knew. Marco's local defeat would not be the point of return of their triumphs. The morning will bring a new wave of suspense. The classroom will be transformed once again, but now it will contain new illusions, respect, inspired by the unyielding will of the chemistry teacher. Without saying a word, she has already won a position inaccessible to any of the students. Very soon the last card will be played, but now is the time to rest and observe, feeling the melody of revenge begin to change into a triumphant overture that will change all of Emerson High forever. Caleb's revelation. Evening was fading at Emerson High when Ms. Albright, managing her after-school hours with restraint, headed toward the library. Veronica Steele, the school's incomparable librarian and secret ally, was waiting at the entrance, clutching a thin folder. "Look at this, Evelyn," Veronica said quietly. "I found something in the archives from the last few months." Inside the folder were copies of emails, screenshots, and notes, neatly laid out in an order that promised much. Now there was one last piece left to catch. The most difficult piece of the puzzle, the one who runs it all at the top, Caleb Vance. As Evelyn walked down the hall, she caught the glances of her students, some of whom hadn't yet realized that their world was about to be turned upside down. Tide Carter, a friend and colleague, stepped out of her way, nodding his eyes and reminding her that for now, everything was under control. In Ms. Albright's office, Claire Montgomery, a journalist for the local newspaper, the Oregonian Observer, was already waiting. Her eyes glittered with anticipation and determination. The woman was an investigative expert whose articles had repeatedly shaken the walls of power. Claire unpacked her laptop and connected to the school network via secure protocol. They began to analyze the files Veronica had retrieved, carefully comparing dates, names, and places. It soon became clear how central Caleb was. His boastful messages concealed an elaborate scheme to sell finished lab reports and essays, a clear violation of academic integrity. But most importantly, he was using these machinations to cement his power, securing the support of influential parents and maintaining his grip on the school hierarchy. Here, Claire pointed to the screen, is his threatening message to one of the teachers who tried to catch him cheating. But nothing was done. This proves that the actions are being covered up. Evelyn felt the tension growing. With each passing moment, a mosaic was being assembled that could destroy the illusion of impunity of the captain of the football team. Veronica soon joined them, holding a flash drive and a folder of printed emails. "Caleb's dad," she said, "is on the PTA and owns a big company. It's only a matter of time before they get access to the university committee." That explained a lot. Why Principal Graham Elroy was suddenly passive, despite the obvious violations. The decision was made in silence. It was necessary to act quickly and decisively. Putting aside doubts, Evelyn prepared an anonymous letter with a full set of evidence and sent it to 3 addresses at once: the admissions office of the prestigious college where Caleb applied, the editorial office of the city newspaper, and the account for anonymous complaints of the school principal. Every word was carefully chosen so as not to leave any chance of evading responsibility. The next morning, the school aisles were buzzing with rumors. The air was thick with anxiety and anticipation. There were already hints of a coming scandal on social media, though opinion was divided. Caleb, usually confident and arrogant, now seemed tense, trembling under the gaze of his comrades and opponents. His reputation was on the brink of collapse. Meanwhile, Ms. Albright spent long hours with Claire, discussing the next steps. "It's not just about breaking a splashy story," the journalist said, "but making sure it becomes a lesson for the entire school." Evelyn nodded, thinking back to her students, those who bore the weight of power beneath the guise of popularity and strength. Her game was becoming not a personal vendetta, but a determined challenge to the system. The day of the final football match was the climax. Caleb should have walked onto the pitch with confidence that was now being eroded by uncertainty. That same day, the local newspaper published a huge article exposing the scheme with detailed evidence, backed up by quotes from anonymous sources and expert commentary from Claire. The headlines screamed corruption and deception, causing an explosion of discussion among students and their parents. The school hallway was unusually quiet. Jenna Hayes, usually the social media queen, looked confused, deleting posts, trying to upload new information to make up for the damage. Marco Rizzi avoided his friends and hid in the shadows. Caleb, facing his father's wrath, stood before Principal Elroy, who was forced to initiate an official investigation. Before the match, in the cold hallway, Caleb stopped Ms. Albright. For the first time, his voice sounded not like an order, but like an admission of defeat. "This is all you, isn't it?" Evelyn looked at him with her impenetrable gaze, quietly and precisely pronouncing words that cut deeper than any insult. "Power, Caleb, is not the privilege of humiliating those weaker than you. It is a responsibility. You failed your exam, and it was just a lab assignment." His silence in response spoke louder than words. Weeks passed. The atmosphere in the school gradually changed, improved. The noise and tension were replaced by calm and respect. Evelyn, standing at the board again, was no longer just a teacher, but a quiet guardian of order. Her eyes showed deep respect, accompanying her restrained severity. The students watched her with a different perception, not fear, but quiet recognition. And though the mutiny was over, Evelyn knew that the real test was yet to come. The forces she had shaken would not disappear without a trace. But now she was ready for the next step in her game. At that moment, the classroom filled with light, and outside the school windows a new night was already gathering, ready to bring new opportunities and challenges. Echoes of revenge. The crowd in the Emerson High cafeteria was like a crumbling sandcastle, shaky and unpredictable. Jenna Hayes, usually the queen of the moment, hid behind the blank screen of her phone. Her Emerson Unfiltered account, which had once terrified and inspired fans, now looked like a ghostly selfie from a bygone era. She kept her head down, shyly walking past tables where her name had once inspired admiration. But now, only whispers. Whispers were cold and emotionless, like freezing rain at the end of the season. Her reputation, built on lies and manipulation, crumbled in her hands like a house of cards. Meanwhile, Marco Rizzi was struggling to keep his balance in the chemistry classroom, sitting at the last desk. His muscles, the gleam of which had once seemed invincible in the eyes of his subordinates, now looked like protective armor, having lost its former strength in the face of study and knowledge. He listened silently as Evelyn taught another lesson, her voice empty, but each word an accurate diagnosis of his weakness. Marco could not take his eyes off the poster with formulas on the wall, where unfamiliar, frightening symbols were flashing. Every wrong turn in the table seemed like a personal mockery to him. In the corridors, he no longer felt like the master of the situation, but only a shadow of his former authority. Caleb Vance, on the other hand, found himself in the middle of a storm he couldn't control. His name was swept through schools in whispers and headlines as a corruption scheme was revealed. The phone in the Vance home broke the evening silence, and his father's voice was not supportive but rebuking, full of frustration and anger. "You've jeopardized everything we've built," he said curtly, leaving no room for excuses. The consequences unfolded too quickly. Headmaster Graham Elroy, always reserved and neutral, was forced to open an official investigation. The very next day, News of the team captain's temporary suspension from football games spread through the corridors. The status of the school's king collapsed like a castle of playing cards. In the library, that quiet island of calm in the midst of the school storm, Veronica Steele carefully examined the news bulletin on her phone. She was Ms. Albright's assistant and the only person who saw the true face of this cold but fair woman. Veronica was not surprised by how emotionless and methodical the revenge was. She knew Evelyn's past, which no one suspected, and she understood that this game was not just payback, but a lesson for everyone. Tide Carter, a friend and colleague of Ms. Albright's, joined Veronica in the library for a short break. His curiosity was piqued. "Do you think this is really the end?" he asked, raising his eyebrows. Veronica smiled, barely perceptibly. "This is just the beginning of a new chapter in the life of this school. You know, sometimes order comes only from chaos." Tide nodded, his biological outlook teaching him to see life as a constant carousel of change. Meanwhile, Ms. Albright remained as calm and taciturn as ever. She did not answer her phone or discuss the situation with anyone, preferring to concentrate on her lessons and upcoming plans. There was a quiet satisfaction in her eyes. Each of the 3 untouchables accepted the lesson on his own terms. She knew that true victory was not simply the fall of enemies, but a change in the very order of this manifestation of the school hierarchy. Principal Graham Elroy, in his office, leafed through a report with the new details about Caleb's case. His face, usually calm and collected, now expressed the weight of responsibility. He knew that these events could change the entire atmosphere of the school and threaten the reputation of the institution. But what frightened him most was that no previous measures would be able to prevent such situations without a new system of values that would have to be formed under the pressure of the current changes. Unbeknownst to most of the students, a new force was born in the hallways: respect for an ideological and strong woman who did not allow herself to break. The students, observing the consequences, began to quietly reconsider their views, and fear and indifference were replaced by recognition in Miss Albright not only of a strict teacher, but also of a guardian of justice. Those who had previously been afraid of even a glance from the untouchables believed in her strength and cold mind. The atmosphere in the school gradually settled into a new rhythm of life, which was not perceived as a punishment, but rather as the beginning of a new era. The soft light of the passing day penetrated through the tall tree corridor windows, filling the space with anticipation. And the next class with new students was already waiting for an idea and strict guidance from Miss Albright, in whose eyes respect and even a slight spark of admiration now burned. And if somewhere in the depths of the consciousness of every former king there remained even a weak reproach, then Miss Evelyn was ready for the next step. She understood that the real game was not over yet, and this was only the beginning of changes that would change not just the status, but the very soul of the school. This was precisely what her next plan was dedicated to, which had yet to be implemented with cold precision. As the next lesson and new challenges awaited, the silence gradually gave way to the echoing whispers of new possibilities and the rustling of pages of the unknown. In this school of change, few can stand, but few can leave without a wise lesson. The fate of Emerson High now lay in the hands of one woman whose strength was not measured in words, but in actions that became thunderclaps in the silent corridor of change. As the story moves smoothly into the next part, there is a sense of anticipation in the air of a new climax, where everyone will choose their side. And Evelyn Albright will once again remind us that true strength begins with understanding and takes the form of inevitable justice. The quiet guardian of order, as Caleb slowly faded into the shadows of the hallway, leaving an oppressive silence behind him, a change began to take hold in the school atmosphere. Evelyn was quick to notice a new feeling in the air, a mixture of wary respect and deep-rooted calm. The classroom, once filled with fear of the elusive teacher, was now filled with concentration and even a certain admiration. In her classes, the students listened attentively to her every word, and their eyes showed not opposition, but recognition. It was as if Ms. Albright had become not just a teacher, but a guardian of order, a quiet sentinel whose strictness did not create fear, but instilled the need to be better, more honest, and more responsible. Early in the day, before the school bell rang, Evelyn looked into the library. Veronica Steele, always with a good book in her hands and a soft smile on her face, greeted her with a familiar, supportive look. "Looks like the lessons aren't going to waste," she said quietly, accompanying the words with a slight nod. Working with the librarian had helped Evelyn gain a deep understanding of the psychology of teenagers and a keen eye for their weaknesses, which had become an integral part of her tactical arsenal. Her influence, though not ostentatious, grew and strengthened steadily, like a beacon to those drowning in social disorder. Students who had previously whispered and shunned her now spoke of Ms. Albright with curiosity, even respect. Tide Carter, a colleague and friend, noticed the shift as he passed the chemistry room. His warm greeting was accompanied by the words, "I never thought a school could change so much because of one person." He saw Evelyn's reserve become a powerful tool of transformation, upending established social roles and pushing aside empty popularity and physical strength. Together they discussed ideas for introducing new forms of education, sharing hopes for a bright future for the school. Claire Montgomery, a local newspaper reporter whom Ms. Albright entrusted with some of the information, played a major role in stabilizing the situation. Her investigations and publications brought clarity to the dark corners of school life and showed parents and administrators that change was necessary. But most importantly, they brought truth and hope to those who had previously lived in fear and under the oppression of the impunity of the school's kings. Claire, by penetrating the web of school politics and parental pressure, built lines of communication that became a support for Evelyn, preventing old problems from returning. Graham Elroy, the school's principal, stood in the background, watching the changes like a patient judge. He understood how much strength and intelligence it had taken for Miss Albright to expose and overthrow a system that had been fueled by corruption and fear for years. But it was his measured response that helped make the necessary decisions. He tightened discipline and established more transparent rules, which made the school's atmosphere much healthier. His views and actions reminded everyone how rare it was to find allies willing to act for the greater good rather than for personal gain. In the hallway, full of school noise and mixed voices, Evelyn met the gaze of her students and felt their attitude change. Many of them showed respect and even gratitude for someone finally standing up for justice and fighting for those who remained silent. The silence, which had previously seemed oppressive, now sounded like a promise of a new order. And the girl felt that her fight was not in vain. Her special revenge became a lesson, followed by changes, breaking outdated stereotypes. The final scene in the lab seemed symbolic. Evelyn stood at the board, explaining the complex processes of chemical reactions, but with a new confidence and spontaneity that won the hearts of her students. They did not fear her stern comments, but looked forward to new discoveries, as if each lesson became a symbol of their own growth. In her eyes there was a quiet strength, almost mystical, one that did not require loud statements or ways to demonstrate power. She became more than a teacher. She was now a symbol of the order and justice that the school had been waiting for so long. Today, Evelyn knew her role was not over. The school was changing, but the trials were still ahead. She prepared for new challenges, maintaining a cool, analytical mind and patience. Her gaze often fell on the empty seat in the classroom next to Veronica, where they discussed new strategies for working with volunteers and the school board. Behind every move, every experiment, there was a thoughtful purpose, not just to punish the past, but to build a future where equality and respect would be the norm. Outside, the sun was shining brightly, and the sports fields were empty after a busy day. The football field where Caleb had once shone as an untouchable king now seemed alien and cold. His fall had been a lesson to many, and his power no longer inspired fear. Privilege no longer blinded him to cruelty and injustice. Everything around him was a reminder that even the strongest could be vulnerable when their actions were based on lies and oppression. In the evening, as Evelyn was closing her office, she heard the distant ringing of the school bell, reminding her that tomorrow would be a new day, new lessons, and new situations. She knew that there was still a lot of work ahead, but she felt calm in her heart. The story of her struggle ended not only with the restoration of justice, but also with the birth of hope. A new era had begun at Emerson High, without fear, without impunity, where everyone had the right to be heard. And while the leaves slowly fell from the branches of the trees in the schoolyard, Ms. Albright prepared to greet a new class of students. Her voice, clear and confident, reminded everyone that order is not an accident, but the result of patience, skill, and fortitude. A warm and calm smile on her face is the only evidence of victory over the previous chaos. The school has ceased to be an arena for the power play of a few. Now it is a place where everyone can find their place and be themselves. The light behind her was slowly fading, but her mission had only just begun. The next chapter of the story promised new challenges, and Evelyn knew the hardest was yet to come. But she was prepared to face them with a cool head and unwavering determination. Her quiet but relentless struggle affected the lives of everyone at Emerson High, paving the way for a new set of rules. And the secret of her specially crafted revenge would forever remain in the shadows. A reminder that justice requires courage and precision. As she walked through the halls where tyranny had once reigned, Ms. Albright now felt responsible not for herself alone, but for an entire society that was once again learning to be free and honest. Her chemistry class was not just science, but a symbol of a complex reaction in which each element must harmoniously combine to create a strong and stable whole. Thus ended one story, but a new one began, full of hope and opening doors for everyone who is ready to fight for the truth.